Welcome to the second session in a series of conversations around a topic that I started yesterday, which I'm hoping will be of some value. I have titled today's session Drudgery and Broken Dreams. In the session I covered previously, I started what I consider to be the introduction to what I call a phenomenon that is here to stay. The genie is out of the bottle. That genie being OnlyFans, but more specifically, sexual content being produced specifically by women. What I hope in the sessions to follow is, I guess, a perspective from both sides of the coin, a perspective that will be of some value to women who are considering that line of pursuit, but also a perspective that perhaps will give those who are already in that line of pursuit a way out at the right time. This is not a moral conversation, and I am not putting my philosophy on the line necessarily. I'll deal with things as I deem fit. Like weaving a tapestry, it takes some time and much effort is needed. This task of trying to identify and address a phenomenon that most people perceive differently and one that divides both parts of the aisle. This task is one I would fail. So let me put it on the table. I will do, however, my best to share ideas and thoughts that could be insightful, but that might cause you to think secondly or think again. Drudgery and broken dreams, today's topic. And I begin. Let's assume perhaps you are a woman and you are looking to start OnlyFans, or you have already started producing content, sexual content on OnlyFans. I want to start by giving you a list of things to keep in mind as I build this building block of conversations. Number one, identify your why. Identify your why. Now, the reason I say this is because if you think about why we do what we do, fundamentally, human beings are more similar than we are different. Our motivations tend to come from two parts. We try to avoid some pain at some level, or we are pursuing pleasure. So there's a pain-pleasure pursuit or push-pull in each and every one of our lives. Our motivations are usually driven by either we're trying to avoid a pain. In this particular instance, it could be the pain of financial, having lack of money, or being financially dependent on other people. And therefore, you're seeking financial freedom and you're running away from the pain of having nothing. It could also be the pleasure that comes with notoriety and fame, influence. It could also be, your why could be love, connection, the need to feel significant, the need to feel important, the need for people to look up to you as someone who is admired. Whatever your reason is, I think the first step is get a piece of paper and write down your why. That why is your reason. The why is also a purpose, something that is driving you. You see, most people who start such, you might say, pursuits, we never stop and ask why. Now, at least you think this is exclusive to those who are producing content. I would say that most workers, professionals, go into their careers, go into their jobs without really understanding their why, what motivates them. In this particular instance, by identifying your why, it puts in paper something that you can look at and come back to make sure that you haven't deviated from your original authentic self or authentic pursuit. The second part is identify or make a list of what it will take for you to be satiated. What will it take for you to feel satisfied? How would you know you've identified and reached the goal? In other words, remember, success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal. You start from where you are and you move towards where you want to get to. The why is what gets you there. The destination should be the target or the goal. So the first thing is your why, which is your energy. The second is then, what would it take for you to feel satisfied? If money is your pursuit, if independence is your pursuit, then quantify that number in a numerical, perhaps, range. you want to make a certain fixed amount of money, or you want to have a certain amount of money saved, invested, before you call it quits. The reason being, you want to know when you get to your destination. Now let me take a pause and bring in a conversation that I shared yesterday. Back in 2008, 2009, just before the financial crisis. Now all of us remember the financial crisis. The reason being, it was of some significance. Most of our parents lost their homes. Some of our loved ones lost their jobs. Some people lost all their savings. Why? Some mistakes were made. Chuck Prince was the CEO and the chairman of Citigroup, a very shrewd businessman. In 2004, 5, 6, going up to 7, but particularly 4, 5, 6, he said, and I quote, "All of this will end badly once the liquidity runs out." Or rephrase in a different way. When the liquidity runs out, all of this will end badly. Chuck Prince could see a foreshadowing of what could happen. He could see that there was perhaps too much liquidity in the system in the financial markets, and people were not thinking carefully about their decisions. The problem, despite him identifying what potentially was going to happen, he had to stay in the game. Reason being, Chuck Prince, because he had investors and he had shareholders, could not afford to say, as the chairman and CEO of Citigroup, I am pulling out and taking out all risks from the table. And we're going to move into cash, and we'll wait until we're certain that the market is safe. Had he done that, he would have got fired from his post, because there were stakeholders and hedge fund managers and pension fund managers and other investors who owned Citigroup, who could have said, this guy doesn't know what he is doing. Look, all this money being made. Why don't we find a new CEO and a chairman who is consistent with what we want, which is to make money, and replace the new CEO and put him on the job. Chuck Prince, therefore, recognizing that despite his adverse position about the market, he had to keep playing. The game of musical chairs comes into the picture, which is the music is playing, you have a fixed number of chairs, you keep going round and round and around, but the key is to know when to exit the game. When to exit, like you're playing a game of cards or whatever, poker, you know when to pull your chips. Take some chips off the table. Take some chips off the table, because if you leave too much in, perhaps you might not calculate carefully when you should leave. So I've given you two, you might say, words of encouragement. The first, identify your why. And number two, identify what it will take for you to feel satiated, for you to feel as though you've achieved what you actually came on the platform to achieve. If it's money, how much is enough? If it's influence, how much is enough? If it's connection, how much is enough? Now, the reason I connect these two things is because there's something called the gap. The gap is the difference between 1 and 2, your purpose or your why, and your goal. There will be a gap. Life should be called the gap. We start off with a dream, and the reality is always different from the dream, because things do not go always in a straight line. And perhaps this is the key part to the conversation I am having with younger women. About 1% of all the content creators on OnlyFans make more than 99% of the total amount earned by all parties. Things never work out in the manner in which we initially hope. And now I have to share something that I thought perhaps is interesting and useful. I found this piece of information, and this is something that we should share with all parties who have an interest in OnlyFans. It states, and if you forgive me and bear with me for a second, it says, this is some numbers, I don't know how accurate this is. OnlyFans in numbers, this is, I think, from the company itself. More than 170 million people use OnlyFans. Creators have been paid more than $2 billion or $1 billion £660,000 collectively by the site. The top creators on the platform earn around £83,000 per month. The average content creator earns almost £125.50 per month. The average creator has 21 subscribers. Every day OnlyFans has about 500,000 people join. And there's some more, but I want to draw your attention to two things. The top creators on the platform earn around £83,000 per month. The average content creator earns about £125. So what you find is there's always a gap. People have the perspective that they will earn in the top 1%. The reality is the majority of people will fall in those who are making only £125. So identify the gap. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is because, let me use a story. Forgive me if you don't believe in this part, in this aspect of my information. The books of antiquities talks about Judas. Judas was one of the 12. Betrayed his master for a few pieces of silver. And it says that Judas finally got the money. He achieved his goal and his dream. And when he had the money in his hands, he had a feeling of remorse, a feeling of sadness. You see, the original idea of actually becoming wealthy and the reality of becoming wealthy, that there was a huge gap. Judas was so unhappy. He had the money in his hands. The money was still hot. The money was still just been counted. And he was unhappy. He took the money back and they said, no, we did a deal. You got the money. We got the man we wanted. To hell with you, do the money as you wish. The money was thrown away by Judas. He hated who he became and he wouldn't forgive himself. Judas hung himself. Why? Because he sold out. He sold out on his principles, in his philosophy, in his values, in his morals, and who he was. Judas was motivated by what I call one of the 7 deadly sins. And this is the key part of the whole OnlyFans thing. To make sure that your motivation or your reason or your why is not the wrong one. Whether that be greed or envy or the love of money. Judas was motivated by the love of money. Now, in contrast, another one of the 12 was Peter. And Peter's, sadly, was, in my opinion, just as bad as Judas. Because Judas was told, one of you will betray me. And the one who gives me a kiss is the one who betrays me. And here he comes. Peter, on the other hand, was supposed to have been the one who professed his love for his master beyond all of the others combined. And Peter was told, you see, before the cock crows 3 times, or cock crows, you would deny me 3 times tonight. And Peter said, impossible. And surely it happened. Now, what was the difference between Judas and Peter? Judas was motivated by the love of money. See, the love of money is the root of all evil. Peter's was influenced and instigated. His actions to have betrayed his master and say, I don't know who he is, was instigated by fear. Now, you might be forgiven for fear. And it's easy to forgive yourself for feeling afraid or lacking courage. But there's a big difference between lack of courage and throwing away all of your values and your principles. Judas could not forgive himself. Peter forgave himself. And the story has two men who went against their principles, but one who found salvation. Salvation in the fact that he was willing to let go and let go of the past. And the reason I bring this into the story is, when you've identified the gap, a time will come, whether now or in the future, where, in my words, you come to a road to Damascus moment, a moment where you say, I'm done with this. The things I used to, love, I now hate, and perhaps the things I used to hate, I now love. I want none of this. And the purpose of remembering the gap and the 2 stories I just gave you is simply to allow yourself room for forgiveness. At the end of today's session, I'm going to share, or leave in the description, a poem that I love. It's a poem called Desiderata, if I am pronouncing it well. It's a beautiful poem. It is a beautiful poem. I'll leave in the description some of the words, perhaps the last two paragraphs. I might actually read it out before the end of today's session. But it's a beautiful poem. And the reason I brought this up is simply, you have to identify for yourself, before you start this journey of OnlyFans, what values, what parts of your core principles you might be going against. You see, because your conscience will go to battle with you. On one side will be your desires, and on the other side will be your conscience. And those who do not reconcile that gap often struggle. In other words, if the pursuit and the love of money makes you fall out with your family, your loved ones, and everything that perhaps you consider to be love, and you embark on this journey and you find some love online by people who are paying you to display what is perhaps your gift, you might find too much to bear eventually. In any case, like the prodigal son, you have to find a pathway that brings you back. A pathway that brings you back to love. The prodigal son is a fascinating one. The reason I bring that in is because if you think about what I've shared so far, 1 to 4, you find that sometimes we leave and we pursue something that is the big dream. We burn our boats and we have no way of returning back. I would suggest to you, before you embark on the journey, or if you've started the journey of OnlyFans, don't burn all your boats, because the future is uncertain. Instead, allow a pathway to bring you home, to bring you back to those who love and care about you, or to allow some form of redemption. A time might come when you turn or convert from being Saul to being Paul, where you let go of things that you once used to find to be a significant part of your identity, and you say, I'm done with this. Now, if you go through the top 4 things I've given you, and you've come to a place of peace in yourself, then proceed, do whatever you want. Now, let me leave you with the last 2 paragraphs of the poem I mentioned. It says, this is the last 2 paragraphs of the poem. It says, beyond the wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have every right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham and drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful and strive to be happy. Beautiful poem. That is the core of what I want to share today.